Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I am Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna. I welcome you to our Wednesday night Bible study. Excuse me. Thank you so much for choosing to hang out with me tonight. Got some really neat stuff to share with you. We're getting into a brand new Bible study tonight, but before we do that, let me just, a little housekeeping. Don't forget, if you are not subscribed, you can hit that little button on the bottom there. It says subscribe, be part of what we're doing here at LMC. Sorry, guys. We thank you for that. You'll be notified every time we go live. Most of you guys have been with me for a while, so you know how this works. Online, the studies are available, or the notes are available. So please check it out, download it this week, and follow along. Now, of course, the notes are going to be up here anyway, but you can follow along. You can download them, put them on your iPad, your phone, whatever it is. It should be in the description section of this YouTube video. So please download the information. Get your Bibles ready. Pens, markers, whatever you got to do. We're going to look at a whole bunch of different stuff today. We're going to be starting a brand new study. And let me see. Let me put this up here this way. Here we go. Brand new study tonight, and it's just going to be the introduction to it, but it's going to be 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now, again, we're just going to do an intro tonight, and the title for tonight, of course, is called The Timeline. I have no idea how long this study is going to go. There's a lot of great information, but before we jump into that, let's just say a quick prayer, and then we'll go. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now, that's a lot of information to cover. It's another book by Shaul. We're going to attack it the way that we always do. We're going to try to go line by line, verse by verse. But before we actually get into the book, there's a couple of things that I want to share with everybody that we need to have as sort of background, if you would, to truly understand, to truly comprehend what this book is about. Now, this background is really important because if you understand this, when you see this, if you see this, your perception of the whole story of the Bible changes. Now, you guys have been with me for a while. You're going to be familiar with what I'm talking about. But we're going to be talking about Jerusalem. We're going to be talking about where its place in history is. A lot of end time stuff, because really, if you think about it, throughout the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, here's just a couple of what I would say are exciting topics, right? Tribulation. Believe it or not, we're going to talk about tribulation. We're going to talk about afflictions and what that really means and what the context for that really is. We are also going to talk about wrath. Yes, the wrath of Almighty God. And we're going to talk about it perhaps in a couple of different ways as well. We're going to talk about sanctification. We talked about that before. We're going to again talk about sanctification. Messiah's return is definitely part of the book of Thessalonians. It's out there. It tells us he's going to come, the shout, the trumpet, all of that. And the day of Yod He Vav He, the day of Yah, or most of us would probably be more familiar with it as the day of the Lord. That's going to be another topic, really good one. I know people will be really interested in that. We touched on it just, I don't know if it was last week or the week before. We're going to go back to that and see how that fits in all of the book of Thessalonians. We are going to talk about resurrection. And of course, if we're talking about resurrection, we're talking about life and we're talking about death. And it's going to take us, that's a big study. That's going to take us quite a while to go through. And it may not be what you're used to hearing, but we're going to try to go through the scripture as best we can and make our arguments and put it in its proper context and order and see what we come out with. We're going to be also talking about, and we hear this a lot. I've heard this. I'm sure you've all heard this when they say peace and safety. Sudden destruction comes. Well, we're going to find out what that actually means and what the context of that is. And of course, we already talked about it a little bit just a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. We're going to go back to the concept of a thief in the night. because it's all really kind of wrapped together. So First and Second Thessalonians are going to be some exciting books. Got some, and that's just some of the topics. There's more topics than even that, but we got a lot of stuff to go through. Lots of interesting things to look at, and certainly some things that you may see for the first time or not. We'll see what happens. All right, so here we go. We are in Thessalonians. Now, I want to do something, because I want to talk about a timeline today. Before we get into the book, there are some things we need to understand, because I want us to look at Thessalonians from a particular lens. And once we understand this lens, it's not just Thessalonians, it is all of the scripture. Excuse me just one second, guys, real quick. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. I had to grab something. So as we go through this, and we understand the lens by which then to look at all the other stories, all the other things, especially concerning end times. Once we understand what the pattern is, it will change how you see everything. It will change really the meaning of the book, or at least the meaning of the book, the way it has been brought down to us. Now, I want to give you an example, and this is just something I came up with just off the top of my head. We need to figure out the timeline. What is the basic timeline? And you got to believe. I mean, if Yeshua is the God of Mount Sinai, and he's come here to give us the mysteries of the kingdom, don't you think somewhere in his teachings he would tell us the exact timeline of how things go, the exact order, the measuring stick, if you would, the ruler by which to measure all other things? Because he does. He absolutely does. Now, we're gonna get into some end time stuff here, and there's one of the things I've noticed, or one of the things I hope we've all noticed, right? When you first started understanding. And I don't mean, way back when you said whatever the prayer was and whatever, religious journey we took to get here. But when you first started understanding who Yah actually is, right? You started understanding that, we are to do what Moses said to do. And Yeshua never says not to do that. We begin to understand what Sabbath is. And one of the things that I hope and I believe we've all experienced is at some point you realize, oh my goodness, there's a lot I have to unlearn, right? There's a lot I have to, change my entire thinking on. And a good rule of thumb for me has been, if there is something that has been a teaching throughout the history of Christendom, all the way up to the modern day today, in my humble opinion, we need to really take a look at that before we just accept it as, okay, this is the truth. Whether everybody believes it or not, I think it's incumbent on all of us. I think we say this all the time, test, right? To test the scripture. We need to really sometimes unlearn a lot before we can even start to learn. Like, the whole Christmas and Easter and all the rest of that stuff. That's all stuff we had to learn, but it's all stuff we had to unlearn and then move on, to the other things that Yah wanted to give us. And it's that process of being skeptical, right? Yeshua's words, if you are on the road that the many are on, it's probably a good idea to check yourself, right? Because Yeshua said the road is narrow. It's narrow and it's difficult. And so, if we're on the road of the many, I think it's a good idea for us to stop and take a look and listen. The scripture is right in front of us. We're going to use different versions, but it's right in front of us. We can all look this up. We can all look at this from an intellectual, spiritual, but an intellectual point of view and try to make this make sense. And two of the things we have to be very, 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 very honest with is we must be honest with what the text actually says, who Yeshua is speaking to. And we also have to be honest with history. We can't start rewriting history and adding things that may have already occurred. We've got to be honest to history and, of course, honest to the scripture, especially in what Yeshua says. I mean, guys, he is the Word of God. I do not think there's something he forgot. I don't think there's something he overlooked. I don't think there's anything that, after he says like, darn, I shouldn't have said that to them. I don't think there's anything written about or by Yeshua about Yeshua that we need to say, well, did he give us the whole story? He's missing a part or he's missing a piece because we now believe this, but he didn't actually say that. So let me give you an example of understanding the timeline and why understanding a timeline is so important, because it really becomes the measuring stick. And I know I said we're getting into Thessalonians. Believe me, we're probably not even going to open up the book today for Thessalonians. So put that aside, but just some understanding. All right, so this is just a kind of a crazy example that I'm going to give. Now on the screen there, let me pop it up so it's big enough for everybody to see. Now, this is not a self-proclamation. This is just a story that came to my mind. All right, so as I read this, figure out the timeline as we go through this, right? While secretly aspiring to be at least a 4-star chef. Now, I love cooking. I'm nowhere near that. I do love cooking, not cleaning, but I love cooking. So it has a little bit of me in there, but it's not about me. Here's this guy who secretly aspires to be at least a 4-star chef. And after much effort, endeavored to make the perfect souffle. The whole, it rises, it's all puffy and all the rest of that. He wants to make the perfect souffle. Now, not allowing himself or myself, I put myself in there, not allowing myself to be discouraged. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a sentence there. So he wants to make the perfect souffle. But despite his or my best efforts, the souffle fell flat. It was bad. It just right down with all the effort that went into this. All right. Not allowing myself or himself to be discouraged, he or I then prepared the perfect souffle for all to see and delight in. Now, you read that, and of course we're dealing with English here, right? And yes, we got to go back to what the languages say, but let's just accept the translations, because we can look at a dozen of them. They're all similar enough to get the story. But if you look at this just from a purely English perspective, obviously it's a story about a guy who wants to cook. He cooks this thing, it turns out horrible. Then he cooks this other thing because he didn't want to be, not allowing himself or himself to be discouraged. He then prepared the perfect gift. So what's the timeline here? How if we were to do like a flow chart, if we were going to do a timeline, start at one end and go through, you might say that, well, he wants to be a chef, right? And look right up on the screen. You can see there's a timeline up there that'll kind of help us all to look at this. This is just an example. So he wants to be a 4-star chef. That's kind of where the story starts, right? He wants to be a 4-star chef. We have no idea except that it says he wanted to perfect the souffle. We have no idea what the time frame is between him wanting to be a 4-star chef and actually attempting to make the souffle. It doesn't tell us. It could be whatever. But let's assume years of practice, right? Because if you're a cook, if you ever tried to do a souffle, that's not an easy thing to do. So whatever, some amount of time in between him wanting to be a 4-star chef and then actually making the souffle. And of course, on the timeline there, you can see what happens to the souffle. It flops. And then in the language that we looked, and I want to just put it back there real quick so you can see it, says, not allowing myself to be discouraged, I then prepared a perfect souffle. And one would imagine, just the way the English is presented, that right after the souffle that flopped, this chef then the next day made the perfect souffle. Now, unfortunately, what we're doing is we're assuming some things not actually given in the text. Now, let's say this was written, a book about, some chef that was, 25, 30 years ago, and this is what happened to the chef. And what he did is after the souffle flopped, he took another couple of years to perfect his cooking skills. And then when the time was right, he made the perfect souffle. Now, you can read that in the English, and again, it sounds like right after the terrible souffle, the very next thing that occurred was the perfect souffle, when in fact, in the story, I'm not making up the stories, this is kind of what's behind it, there was a long passage of time in between the souffle flop and the other souffle. But the only word that we have that gives us any indication, and it doesn't really tell us a lot unless you knew the chef, unless you knew the story. If you're 2,000 years after the story, you can look back at history and see what actually happened. And to know that, well, this chef didn't cook again for a couple of years. But then when he finally came back, he made it on TV. He's got his own show. He's cooking, selling his own utensils. He's on YouTube. He's got, everything's good now. But it took time. Now, it's that idea of reading something and it looking like when you read it, two events are separated by the word then are actually happening consecutively. It happens, and then the next thing happens. I shouldn't use the word then to describe then. But it's an intermediate amount of time, at least in the example that I've given to you guys. It's an intermediate amount of time. We don't know how much time passed between the good souffle and the bad souffle. Okay, so this example is there because I want us to look at and establish through Yeshua's words a timeline of how events are supposed to unfold and how we are then supposed to apply those events to every other book that comes after this, every one of the epistles, all the way up to the book of Revelation, that once we understand this pattern, to then apply it to everything else that comes. Now, here is a proposed timeline, because this is really what we're talking about. We're talking about eschatology, and eschatology is the big word that means study of end times, right? Everybody wants to know about end times today. Who doesn't want to know about end times? Look at what's going on all around us, all the craziness and wars and, just disease. And I mean, it's nuts. So who doesn't want to know about end times? And what we hear very often, is things are going on. It's wars and it's rumors of wars and pestilence, and it could happen at any moment, and earthquakes are happening everywhere. And, and these are the things that we should be looking for. And when it happens, then a temple's going to be built. And of course, within that temple, there's going to be an Antichrist. And then the whole world's going to worship that Antichrist, and they're going to receive a mark. And that is assuming, and this is important, that view of end times, of eschatology, of things that occur at the end, is assuming that all of the church fathers who came before us, same ones that started Catholicism, same ones that started Protestantism, same religious groups that did some of the most horrific things on the planet, that their understanding of it is correct. And it's been passed down, not just throughout, the different denominations and fellowships, right up to even, all people who claim faith in Messiah, because that's the general idea. That's the general concept. So I'm definitely going to be sharing something different with you. And I know, but when we hear different, our first instinct is to put our back up and say, I don't know about that. But we did the same thing with Torah. We did the same thing with understanding. We heard something, it was like, I don't know. But then there's that thing inside that says, yeah, but you know what? That makes sense. That makes more sense than, celebrating some, whatever holiday or thing or whatever it was. So here is the basic idea. And I'm giving this is like Reader's Digest, trying to make it as simple as possible. But here is a proposed timeline that, again, most of Christendom, all Christian groups and even Messianic groups would accept as the timeline of how events are supposed to roll out. Now there's different nuances. Is it pre-trib? Is it post-trib? Is it, this, there's 7 years, 3.5 years. That's all some detailed stuff I don't want to get into, at least for right now. But here, let's look at the timeline. It starts with Abraham, goes all the way to Moses, and from Moses all the way to Malachi. And then the next thing on the timeline is, well, Yeshua comes. Yeshua's sacrifice is made. And after Yeshua's sacrifice, there is at least from our perspective today, and I should have just put question marks there because who knows? It's 2,000 years. It could be 2,050 years. It could be 2,025 years. I don't know. But it's been roughly 2,000 years. And so you've got Messiah sacrifice and you've got 2,000 years of now this message that started off with Abraham given to Moses from Malachi to Yeshua. Now this message is going out to all over the world, to all sorts of people during that 2,000-year period. And then at the end of that 2,000-year period, or whether it's 2,000 or whatever the number is, at the end of that period, there's going to be a period. Of course, we're kind of referring to Daniel's 70 weeks, but we'll deal with that another day. That at some point, a temple must be built in Jerusalem to fulfill the prophecies of the destruction of the temple, to fulfill the prophecies of an anti-Messiah. That Jerusalem and the temple will, at the end time, be destroyed. Messiah will come. The day of Yah, or again, most of us will be familiar with the day of the Lord, the day of Yah occurs. That is, from most of our perspectives, the day Messiah comes back. That is the day of the Lord. And of course, in all of that, Yeshua obviously returns. Resurrection occurs, all the rest of that. And this, again, this is a very general, just blanket statement. I'm not getting into the weeds of pre, post, mid, all the rest of that. I'm just giving you the general idea. Most groups, if you ask them across the board of teachers, we're looking for signs. Pestilence and disease and nation against nation and earthquakes and all of these things are some of the things we're looking for to give us an idea. We're looking for the formation of the nation of Israel. And we'll find out, we'll talk where that comes from and does that really have any bearing on what the story's about. So this is the proposed timeline. Again, I'm just putting this out there so that you guys have this. Of course, the notes, guys, don't forget, you can download the notes. You can get these. They're in tile fashion, so you guys can print it out, and you'll have these little charts, because I got a couple little charts on here for today. But so this way you have it for your records, and you can go. All right, so let's move on. Again, if there is a timeline, right? If there is a pattern, and our God is a God of patterns. You guys have been doing studies with me long enough to know that our God is a God of pattern, that he sticks to patterns, right? That he gives all of the feast days in the order in which they come because they tell a story, right? And Yah sticks to that story. That is his pattern. He is a Yah that does things neatly and in order, right? Well, if there's patterns in all of that, don't you think that there would be patterns even in our understanding of what most of us consider end times to mean today's time, or really what Yeshua told his disciples when he was there? And of course, you think about end time verse chapters, you think about Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Luke 19 and so forth and so on. And we're going to get into all of those. But don't you think the Word of God, right? Elohim himself, the very creator of everything, who created everything and did not make a mistake, did not leave some, he didn't leave a chromosome out of our body that we needed for something. He didn't leave out some chemical reaction. He made sure the oceans worked. He made sure that oxygen worked correctly. Made sure there was an atmosphere. He didn't miss a beat. And to think that now Yeshua would come, give us the mysteries of the kingdom, right? Stuff that people did not know before. It was there, but couldn't really wrap their minds around it. The old wine versus the new wine, right? To think that he would come and give us the new wine to help us understand what the kingdom of Yah is really about, and that he wouldn't clarify for us what the events are that are going to occur and their relationship to us. He did. He absolutely did. It's just most of us are looking at what everybody else is doing. And we need to stop and just really take a slow look at what Yeshua says. So here's Matthew. Here's Matthew chapter 22. Again, I know this is a study in Thessalonians. We will get there eventually. But once you know this, it's going to make Thessalonians that much easier to understand. So here's Matthew chapter 22, starting at verse 33. And we know this, and it's actually Matthew chapter 22, chapter 22, chapter 21, chapter 23. The parable of the vineyard, the parable of the wedding, and all of chapter 23, the woes. But we'll get there. So here is the parable of the vineyard. And it says, here another parable. There was a certain man. Actually, I should be chapter 21, I think it is. Somebody can check me on that. Maybe I think I have a typo up here. I think it's chapter 21, verses 33 to 46, but I don't have my Bible sitting in front of me. Somebody can check that. At either rate, find the parable of the vineyard in your Bible in the Gospel of Matthew. It says, here another parable. There was a certain man, a householder, who planted a vineyard. So what we're going to find out is there's a pattern in here. All right, so far, now let's just interpret this because it's important to interpret this correctly. The vineyard he's talking about is the temple, is the city of Jerusalem, but is the temple. The city of Jerusalem and the temple are intricate. They cannot be separated from one another in a biblical sense. So this story is about a man who planted a vineyard, who planted the temple and placed a hedge around it, a city around it, and he dug a wine press in it and built a watchtower. And he leased it to vine dressers. Now, just so you are 100% clear that as the master is telling this parable, the people that he is telling it to, they understand exactly what he is saying, exactly what he means, because this is a parable or a story that actually comes out of the book of Isaiah. So Yeshua is referring to something that was already said, but now he's giving us the mysteries of the kingdom. He's telling us a parable. He's telling us something you didn't understand before. It was there. It was always there, but they didn't have eyes to see it. They didn't have ears to hear it. So here it is. He's actually quoting from Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. And it's in blue there, so you can see it's different from the text that we're reading in the Gospel of Matthew. It says, please let me sing to the one I love, a song for my loved one, or my beloved, I think is how maybe the King James or NIV says it. My beloved one, regarding his vineyard. My loved one has a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it up and he cleared it out of stones and planted it with the choicest vine. And he built a watchtower in its midst and also made a wine press in it. So can you see this is the story he's referring to? All right, so as he's saying this to the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, all the religious leaders, but he's doing this in the temple, right? He's in the temple proper doing this. And of course, Isaiah goes on to say, and he waited, he made a wine press in it, and he waited for the yielding of grapes. He waited for harvest, fruit time, but it yielded rotten ones. And now, O inhabitant of Jerusalem and men of Judea, so you know exactly who he's talking about, right? Who's the vineyard? The men of Judah, the men of Jerusalem, of which the temple, the winepress, is in the middle of it. Please judge between me and my vineyard. And then when you skip all the way down to verse 7, I didn't want to take the time to go through all the verses. But when you get to verse 7, it's just very, very clear who Isaiah is talking about, that Yeshua is now referring to. For the vineyard of Yah, of hosts, is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah, his pleasant plant. He looked for right rulings, but see oppression, for righteousness, but see weeping. And then it goes on and on and on to tell us things were messed up in Isaiah's day, and they didn't get any better by the time Yeshua came. This was a continual problem. Where? In Judah, in Jerusalem, in the temple. All right, so that's the context. So now Yeshua is starting this parable in Matthew 22, and he says, there's a certain man, a household, he had a vineyard, he placed a hedge around it, a wine press, and he built a watchtower. Boom, think in Isaiah. He's talking about the house of Israel, Judah, the people right in front of him. Well, it goes on to say in verse 34, it says, and when the season of the fruits drew near, that's harvest time, right? He sent his servants to the farmers, the prophets. Now, we're putting this story in its context. If Israel is the vineyard he's talking about, when he's talking about sending out servants to go get fruit, he's talking about the prophets, right? He's talking about the people that have been sent to the house of Israel time after time after time, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, and many, many others, of probably which aren't any books, but servants. We've got what books we've got, but I'm sure many, many others who were servants of Yah, who spoke to the people. It says, he sent his servants to the farmers to receive its fruit. And the farmers took his servants, beat one, and they killed one, and they stoned another. So in a timeline, right, in a timeline fashion, he's telling us he made Israel. He built this wine press, put the temple there, put the people in it. They were not bringing the fruit they were supposed to bring. Even those servants were sent. So timeline from the temple on. And yes, they killed prophets. They stoned them. They ostracized them. They just would not listen to them. So he's talking in a timeline. And he's actually talking in a literal timeline of how events have unfolded, but he's doing it in a parable. All right, verse 36. So it says they beat one, they killed one, and they stoned another. Now verse 36. Let's understand the timeline here. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first. Now, let's follow history. So if sending the servants that were beaten and killed and stoned, etc., people wouldn't believe the message, who are the new servants that are being sent? That will also, as it says here, he sends other servants more than the first, and they did the same thing. They spoke Yah's word. Verse 37, and at last he sent his son, Yeshua Messiah, to them, saying, they shall all respect my son. So who are the other prophets he's talking about? Who are the other people who are not like the first ones who were sent? These are other servants who were sent. And the son was also sent. And I believe in a timeline, he's speaking about the disciples. He's speaking about the apostles. He's speaking about them also being sent out, like the other ones. And the son, of course, is also sent. And it says about the son, they shall respect my son. Verse 38. But when the farmers, again, let's identify them, Judah, Jerusalem, the temple. But when the farmers saw us, I'm sorry, skip the verse. But when the farmers saw the son, they said amongst themselves, this is their heir. Come, let us kill him, crucifixion, Golgotha, and let us possess his inheritance. So they did likewise to the other servants, killed them, beat them, did everything they were supposed to do, and they even killed the son. Verse 39, and they took him and threw him out of the vineyard, out of the temple, because the vineyard is the temple. The winepress is the temple. The hedge around it is Jerusalem. And they took him, the son, threw him out of the vineyard. Well, that's history. That's Yeshua being cast out of Jerusalem. He's killed on the outside of Jerusalem, outside of the temple, and he's killed. Therefore, when the master of the vineyard comes. Now, the master of the vineyard, we could say it's Father, but Yeshua is also the master of the vineyard. Father and Son are one. All authority has been given to me. So he says, so therefore, when the master of the vineyard comes. Now, I don't know if he's talking about when he comes and you kill him or after that, but we'll see how this fits. When the master of the vineyard comes, what shall he do to those farmers? So timeline, they built a vineyard. They didn't bring the fruit. They killed the guys who were sent to it, then killed other people who were sent to it and killed the son. And now what is supposed to be done with these people who have a vineyard and a wine press and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I know you guys know this probably. We've talked about it before. But don't forget, he's talking to the chief priests, to the scribes, to the Pharisees. Look at verse 41. It says, they said to him, this is the Pharisees, the chief priests responding. They said to him, evil ones, he shall bring them to evil destruction. Well, who's he talking about? Jerusalem, the temple, Judah, Israel, who we know is the vineyard. So their own judgment, their own voice upon themselves is what should be done to the people who kill the Son. Well, who winds up killing the Son? They do. They're actually prophesying what's coming to them. And lease the vineyard, the temple. And it's not really the temple, as we're going to find out, because we're at the end of the story, it's the temple teaching. It's the mysteries of the kingdom. But let's follow the story. It says, and lease the vineyard, the temple teaching, to other farmers. So take it away from these farmers, destroy them, kill them, and give this thing to other people, who shall give to him the fruits in their season. Yeshua said to them, did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the buildings rejected? And of course, in the story, the one they rejected is the Son. So Yeshua is speaking of himself as the master here. The stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Has become or is the master of the vineyard. Just that, you remember, yellow is just sort of me putting it in there. It says, this was from Yod He Vav He, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Think about what he's saying, because he's giving us a timeline here. And he's saying this amazing story was already thought out by my Father. It's all, we know what's going to happen. He's going to work it, and he's going to use it to bring fruit. And he who falls on this stone shall be broken, meaning Messiah. But on whomever it falls, he shall be pulverized. Well, what's about to fall? From their own words, what's about to fall on them and their city and their temple? They're going to be pulverized. The stone is going to fall on them. And of course, it says, and the chief priests and the Pharisees, having heard his parables, knew that he was speaking of them. All right, so, we read through this, dozen times, half dozen times. What does all of this mean? How is this a timeline? Well, think about this. I got two timelines up there, and I want you to sort of ask yourself, or let me ask you, and I want you to think, is the story, the timeline of events, the one thing happening after another, does it reflect the top chart or the bottom one? Because the top one says it starts with a vineyard rental, right? Okay, they lease the vineyard. Then it goes into the killing of the servants. Then it goes into the killing of the Son. And what happens after the Son is killed? The kingdom is taken from them, and the city and they are destroyed. The evil, wicked ones are destroyed. Then what happens? Then it gets leased out. The information in the temple, in the scripture, the whole story, then gets leased out to other farmers. Guys, follow this real quick. What happens first? Kill the Son. The evil, wicked ones are destroyed. Then it's given to others. And there's something missing there. Or there's something added there, because this is the way most would think today. So we've got Yeshua telling us the Son's killed, the wicked ones are destroyed, and it's leased to others so that they can bring fruit in due season. And then we teach today that there's going to be another thing at the end, where another temple and another. Did Yeshua say any of that in this parable? Does he mention after the new nation, the new peoples, that the gospel goes to them, that they are to bear fruit? Does he then say, then another thing is coming? And if another thing is coming, and he didn't say that to us and didn't give us that information, then did he? I mean, I don't think it slipped his mind. I don't think he forgot about it. I mean, that's kind of absurd to me. If this is part of the story, don't you think he would have put it in this, a story about what's going on and the coming destruction? Now, look underneath it. And here's what I would say is indeed the story. The temple, Jerusalem, the vineyard is created by Yah. It's called the temple in Jerusalem. Yes, they killed the prophets. They didn't want to hear it. They killed many prophets, stoned them, all the rest of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They killed the son and other prophets that were sent to them as well. I should have put that in there. And then what happens? Then the city gets destroyed, or the people get destroyed. The people that have the vineyard get destroyed. And then the gospel goes out to others. Now, here's the thing. We read or we end the story here, or Yeshua ends the story that it's being leased to others who will bring forth its fruit, but doesn't tell us anything after that. At least not here. There's not, and then this will occur. Actually, the only then this will occur, as he says, and they'll bring fruit in due season. And so the bringing of fruit, the harvest, if that's the end result of all of this, how long is the vineyard leased out to the others who are not the ones who were part of the city, part of Jerusalem, part of the temple to begin with? Well, from our perspective, we're talking 2,000 years, right? Again, it could be more, who knows? But from where we stand, roughly about 2,000 years. And then there's nothing except that harvest will come and they will bring fruit in their due season. So we don't get a lot of more information after the destruction of the city, the destruction of the temple, and then the gospel goes out. And listen, historically, that's the way it worked. I mean, for the first almost 50 years of the disciples going out, it was predominantly Jewish. Yes, we read some Gentiles come in, mainly they're proselytes who are already parts of synagogues. And yes, there are other Gentiles outside who do eventually come in. But the influx of Gentiles into what we call the people of the way that become the Gentile church, that happens after the destruction of Jerusalem, after they're scattered. Remember, it's Judea, it's Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, then the uttermost parts of the earth. Well, the reason it's the uttermost parts of the earth is because by that time they were scattered everywhere, and this message gets sent out. And that's kind of where this parable leaves us off. But it gives us a pattern, at least part of a pattern. The giving of the vineyard, the destruction of the prophets who come, the killing of the son, and the killing of other prophets with the son, and the destruction of the evil ones, then giving it out to another people. And again, we would have to assume, now again, we're at the end of the story, so it's a little bit easier for us to look back and say, listen, from that destruction till now, it's been around 2,000 years. So we see things that they didn't see. But Yeshua saw it. Yeshua knew this, and you'll see that he speaks to it in just a moment. All right, so that's chapter 21. I think on the thing I said 22, but that's chapter 21. So here's Matthew chapter 22. And he's going to give, this is, the very next chapter. So now he's going to give them another parable. And amazingly, this parable really says the same thing the first one said, except it gives us a little bit more information, which just helps us establish a timeline, a reference point, a measuring stick, a rod by which then to read everything else that winds up being said. Because if this pattern holds true, if the patterns that are being taught here hold true, then they must hold true everywhere. And it changes everything we thought, everything we think. Here is the parable of the wedding. Again, this is stuff we've talked about before, but we're looking at it from a little bit different perspective. Verse 1 says, "And Yeshua responded and spoke to them again by parables and said, the kingdom of heaven, the reign of the heavens, is like a man." Now, in this story, the man here is father, right? He's the king. There was a man, a sovereign, who made a wedding feast for his son. Now, the son, obviously, if it's the father, the son is Yeshua. Now, to maybe just kind of give it a little bit more color, when did the father prepare the wedding feast? Well, this is telling us it's been prepared for a long time, or it was ready, or it was intended a long time ago, right? Yeshua was slain from the foundation of the world. This thing's been thought out already. So that's kind of that's sort of a little window into that. Verse 3 says, and he sent out his servants. Well, this is no different than the parable we just read. He's sending out servants from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to Malachi. Those are the servants that he initially, just like in the first parable, sends out one set of servants and then sends out another set of servants connected with the son who also gets killed. Listen to what Yeshua says. And he sent out servants, the prophets, again from Abraham to Malachi or Noah to Malachi, to call those who were invited. Well, who was invited? The vineyard, the people of the vineyard, Jerusalem, Israel, the temple, the northern house, the southern house. They were all invited. Invited to where? The wedding feast. But they would not come. No different than saying we've got no fruit. It's the same way of thinking, a little bit different story. So they said, but they would not come. Verse 4, again. So there's the first prophets that go out, and now here's the second set. He says, again, he sent out other servants, and I put in there in yellow because I want to connect it to the parable that just came before us. Not only does he send other servants, but he sends the son as well. And what do these people do to the other servants? They send out other servants saying to those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and fatted cattle are slaughtered, and all is ready. The son's ready, right? So we're talking about the disciples here. He's talking about the apostles, the disciples. They are the other servants who also give the same message, and listen to what it says that they do to them. All is ready, come to the wedding feast, but they, the people, disregarded it and went their way, one to his field, one to his trade, and the rest, so that's the people, the rest, the other people he's talking about are the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the synagogue leaders. But the rest, having seized his servants, the second group of servants that connected with the son of the first parable, they seize those servants, the apostles, the disciples. We're talking about the time of Saul, and the great persecution, killing the Netzarim, killing the people of the way, dragging them from wherever they are to bring them to Jerusalem. And don't think it stopped when Saul stopped. Saul wasn't the only one doing this. This was persecution that was going on all over the place. They were sending people to synagogues everywhere. There was great trial and tribulation going on in synagogues all over the world, as not just starting off with from the Sanhedrin and from Jerusalem, but then it later on becomes from Rome as well, from both of them at the same time. This is the historical context that this is speaking about, or this is what Yeshua is prophesying about. But they, the people, disregarded it and went their way, this one to his field, that one to his trade, and the rest, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, having seized his servants, Yeshua and the apostles, insulted them and killed them. That is a parallel to what we just read in the parable of the vineyard. And you're going to see as we begin to compare these two timelines, it's going to give us a much, much more clear picture. And that will be two witnesses giving us a clear picture. Here's Yeshua giving us the words of what the order of events are that is coming. But Yeshua, or the story, doesn't stop here. Here's verse 31. Actually, you know what? Let me do this. So just to show you, because I'm telling you that the second set of servants are the disciples, that they're going to be killed, and we know historically all of this happens. But Yeshua also prophesies about this a little bit later, actually in the next chapter. So all of these chapters are to be taken together. But here, just to throw some words out at you. So that you realize this is what he's talking about when he says the second set are hassled and killed and mother and father against you and all the rest of that. Here's Matthew chapter 23. So we're jumping one chapter ahead, but just for clarity. Here's verses 31 through 36. This is Yeshua. Thus you bear witness. He's talking about, this is the woes. He's talking to the Pharisees, the scribes, all the horrible, terrible, dumb things that they're doing. He says, thus you bear witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who did murder the prophets. He's connecting them right to the two parables he just told in the first two chapters. You killed the servants, you're going to kill the son, and you're going to kill the other servants that are sent. You think you're different. He's saying, no, you are the children of those people, and you're going to do it again. Verse 32, and you fill up the measure of your fathers, serpents, brood of vipers. Again, we talked all about that and what the implications of that is. Another message, another day. How would you escape the judgment of Gehenna? Because of these, see, I send you prophets and wise men and scholars of Scripture. He's not saying, I sent you wise men. He already said, your fathers killed them. That was done already. Yeshua is saying, I'm going to send you prophets, and I'm going to send you scholars of Scripture. Some of them you shall kill and impale, and some of them you shall flog in your congregations. And that's really an unfortunate rendering there. It's in your synagogues that this will occur. And persecute from city to city, so that on you should come the righteous bloodshed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the dwelling place and the slaughter place. Verse 36 is so important. Yeshua is telling them, your forefathers killed the prophets. I'm sending other prophets to you, and you're going to kill them, and you're going to kill the son. Just putting the parable in there. The son's going to be killed too. And he says, you're going to go after the disciples, the people of the way in your congregations. You're going to go after them. You're going to try to kill them. You're going to stone them. All the things that happens to Paul and all the rest of them, including the people of Thessalonia. We're going to find out they also were dealing with all of this mess, this trial and tribulation, this hatred coming out of Jerusalem, and the hatred coming out of Rome as well. And Yeshua says, truly, I say to you. Listen, when Yeshua says, I say to you, or truly, truly, he means what he's saying. Take him literally at what he's saying. And what is he saying to those scribes, those Pharisees, those chief priests that he said in chapter 21 and 22 already, and they knew it? He says, truly, I say to you, all this shall come upon this generation. All what? The blood of all the other generations is going to come where? On this temple, on this generation. Now we know, just from a historical perspective, it happens 40 years later. It happens around 70 AD. We're talking some, 30 something AD here. This is consistent with history, the way history has unfolded. He's not talking about some other thing off in the future. He's talking about this temple, this Jerusalem, these priests. This is what they are going to do. This is what the story is actually about. So let's go back to the wedding feast. So now we just confirm that. So when Yeshua is saying other prophets, we now know he's talking about the disciples, the apostles, Saul, Peter, James, all of them. Here we go back to back to Matthew, back to the parable of the wedding feast. It says, but when the sovereign, the father, heard that they killed the other set of servants, right? So they didn't just kill the first set, they killed the other set of servants. When he heard this, he was wroth. And that word wroth means wrath, angry, ticked off to no end. Something bad's coming. So the father, we're being told here, is angry with the people who killed all the other prophets and killed the second set of prophets. And again, if we connect it to the parable, and killed the son. And he sent out his soldiers. Now I put in there, and I forgot to make it yellow, but I put in there in parentheses, angels, because there are angels behind all this. There's angels and principalities behind everything. But when he says his soldiers, historically, what he's really talking about is Rome, the Roman Empire, the 10th Legion, and the 30,000 men that come against Jerusalem, and maybe even more than that. That's what he's referring to. So he's saying the Father was mad at those who didn't listen to the servants over time, didn't listen to the second set of servants, killed them, killed the Son. He's so mad with them that he's going to send out his soldiers to do what? To destroy those murderers and set their city on fire. Guys, there's the order. There's the order. We've got the order. The message goes out from Abraham all the way to Malachi. Yeshua comes. The disciples come. They still don't accept the message. They kill the master. They kill the disciples. They kill all the witnesses of Yeshua, or many of them, and persecute them in every direction, every place that they went. And what is going to be Father's reaction? Yeshua already said, on this generation will come blah, 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 blah. Here he's telling us exactly what's going to come. They are going to be destroyed. Those murderers, those people, those chief priests, their children, that generation is going to be murdered, and their city, Jerusalem, the temple, is going to be set on fire. Guys, this is Yeshua. He's telling us what happens historically. You and I can now sit here 2,000 years later, look back at it and say it happened exactly the way Yeshua said it was going to happen. Verbatim to that generation is how it actually happened. Then he goes on to say, so let's let me read on a second. I'll get back to the yellow. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready. It's been ready, and the invitation's been given out for a long time. And there's more invitations to be given out. Is ready, but those who were invited, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the people, were not worthy. Therefore, go into the street corners, and as many as you find of the nations, of the Gentiles, invite to the wedding feast. Now, let me stop here just for a second. Let's think about this historically. So he says they kill the servants, they kill the son, as far as the parable of the vineyard is concerned. They kill the son. The parable of the vineyard says, what do? You wipe them out. You destroy them. The wedding feast says, what do? You destroy them, and you destroy their city. And their city is the temple, Jerusalem. You destroy them. Then what happens? Then you invite everyone from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, now to be scattered. Historically, is what happened is they get scattered everywhere. And yes, of course, Paul went out before and he did his missionary journeys, and a few did. But now we're talking about everybody got kicked out. Everybody left Jerusalem. The gospel went everywhere after this, from synagogue to synagogue, from Gentile to Jew. It went everywhere. After the fall of Jerusalem, it shot up. That's when the influx of Gentiles, the great influx of Gentiles, began to come in. And by the end of the first century, getting into the second century, there were more Gentiles in this new faith than there even were Jews. That's history. You can't change that. That's the way it happened. And that's what he's saying here. So go to the street corners and find as many. And so how long is this going to the street corners going to last? Well, from our perspective, again, just like we read in the parable of the vineyard, from our perspective, the new farmers that it gets leased out to, the new vineyard owners, 2,000 years. It's been, again, question mark, but it's been 2,000 years. Invite to the wedding feast. And those servants, the apostles, the disciples, the Jews, because these are Jews that are being sent out. the Jews went out into street corners and gathered all whom they found, both wicked, the Gentiles, and the good, the Jew. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. How long did it take of going out to the good and to the evil to get to the actual wedding feast? Again, from our perspective, after the destruction of the city, then the major push to go out, then at some point, and again, it's an indeterminate amount of time, then the wedding feast occurs. And of course, you know the verses for the wedding feast. Verse 11 says, and when the sovereign came in to view the guests, so now the guests have all come over the last 2,000 years. He saw there was a man who had not put on a wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you come in here not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the sovereign said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away and throw him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And of course, for many are called, but few are chosen. So what's the end product of this story of the wedding feast? The wedding. But what we don't see if you just read it, for what it says, it sounds like it's saying, okay, the city gets destroyed, the servants get killed, and now all these other people come in, the good and the evil. Like it happened the next day. Well, no, it didn't happen the next day. I know it's easy to read it that way, but that's not what it's saying. At least not as we look back in history. We realize there's a gap there. There's a gap there between the destruction and going out to all of the world, all over the world, the last 2,000 years, and the final wedding feast, or the time to bring the fruit, the harvest in the parable of the vineyard. They are both telling us the same pattern. They're both giving us the same outline or the measuring stick that we need to use to understand everything else that's going to go on from this point. Here's both of those, both the marriage feast and the parable of the vineyard. Parable of the vineyard is underneath, the marriage feast is up on top. So here's a chart. Let me make this chart bigger for you guys. Here we go. So here's a chart, and we can compare them to see that the order of events is consistent. So what's the marriage feast, the initial thing's the wedding, right? The wedding, the father wants a wedding. Then there's the rejection of servants. We'll go down underneath that. What's the initial thing? A vineyard, right? A vineyard is made. And then what do? They kill the prophets, reject the servants. Other servants, including the son in the parable of the vineyard is given. Also, in the wedding feast, other servants, and I'm just putting the son in there because it's part of the parable of the vineyard, other servants come and they get killed too. And people reject what they're saying as well. What's the next thing to happen? The temple and the city are destroyed. What's the next thing to happen in the parable of the vineyard? Destroy those evil, wicked men. The temple and the city get destroyed. Then what happens in both of them? In the marriage feast, others are invited, good and evil. In the parable of the vineyard, the kingdom's being taken away from you and given to others who will bring forth its fruit in due season. How long do the others get invited to the wedding feast? The same time that the others get leased out the kingdom of God. For now, 2,000 years and counting. And then what's at the end of all of this? The wedding feast, of course, where you need to have the garment. That's a whole other message for a whole other day. But where you need to be dressed properly, or fruit harvest. They are both the same thing. They are both speaking about that end product. But I want you to notice the pattern here. The pattern is consistent. Prophets come, the disciples come, Yeshua gets killed, Jerusalem gets destroyed, the message goes out to the world and continues to go out, and that's the long gap of time. And what references that whole gap of time? The word then. This happened, then that. We don't know what then means. Then we now know means 2,000 years. But there is no mention, guys, there is no mention in either one of these parables, though he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. There is no mention that it gets destroyed here and then later on gets built back up and becomes this global thing in the whole world. Guys, that's important. That's some important information that if Yeshua is going over this information, don't you think he should have shared it? I mean, it almost seems elementary. If that's how things are going to go, then why not say, well, they destroyed the city and then they're going to destroy the city all over again at the end of this, before they have the wedding or before they get the fruit. That's not what it says. That's just not what it says. And it's not consistent with so many other things that we've been talking about, like Hagar being kicked out twice, only twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, only twice she winds up getting kicked out. The pattern is there, which then makes the destruction of Jerusalem. Actually, there's 2 major prophecies that Yeshua has given us in both of these parables, the parable of the vineyard and the parable of the wedding feast. 2 major prophecies. One, the sun is coming, right? The SON is coming. It's all about the sun. Number 2, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. As a matter of fact, the most spoken about event in all of the Bible, from Genesis to Malachi, the most spoken event is the coming of the Messiah. It has more prophecies than you and I can even count. But do you know what the second most spoken about, prophesied event is in the Bible? The destruction of Jerusalem. So what should be the 2 main events that we need to look at and understand where they fall in history prophetically to understand even what the end times is about or what our day is about? You must understand what these 2 parables say. The coming of the sun and the destruction of Jerusalem are paramount, and they would happen to that generation. Take Yeshua's words verbatim, because that's how he speaks. So I want you to see the pattern here. Hopefully you guys can see the pattern. This is very, very, very important once we start to get into 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And not just that, there's others. Let's take a look real quick. Let me just go over this. So here's the timeline, or here's the events written down. Again, you guys should have these notes. You guys can download it. So again, and I said it before, I'm going to say it again. I do not believe Yeshua would have made a mistake and not given us, because he's given us the whole story up to the wedding feast, and he's given us the whole story up to the harvest. Why not tell us, well, what happens here is going to actually happen again, or somebody else's. He doesn't say any of that. He doesn't share any of that, guys, in any of the information for which he talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. When he talks about what we call today end times, he's not talking about end times from our perspective. The bulk of the information that he's talking about is the end of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, of its people, of its priesthood. The tutor must be removed. The time of the tutor is over. That's the second most prophesied event in all of the Bible. So I don't think Yah made a mistake. I don't think Yeshua made a mistake. I don't think it just slipped his mind. I think if it was important and it was stuff that we needed to know, he would have clearly told us. So it always starts with Israel. It starts with Judah, starts with the temple, starts with Jerusalem, because you cannot disconnect Jerusalem from the temple. If you say Jerusalem, you mean the temple. If you say the temple, you mean Jerusalem. They are the same entity, right? So and obviously the people that are in it. So it starts with Israel, Judah. The people reject the prophets. The temple rejects Yeshua and the disciples. The city and the temple are destroyed because of their abominations. The temple is made desolate. That's a really important definition I just gave you. I'll show it to you another time. We'll go back. We'll look over things, because everybody's looking for something called abomination of desolation. But the example that's given to us is how bad things got that the temple would be destroyed. And it's going to happen again. When? Well, when Yeshua told us in that generation, they would be so abominable in what they were doing that Yah must destroy the tutor. He must destroy the temple. And the kingdom gets stripped from them. No, guys, Yeshua said, there's a day coming, and now is, when you're not going to worship in Merek Gerizim. You Gentiles don't know what you're doing, but neither in Jerusalem. He's telling us that's the major event. You're not going to worship in Jerusalem anymore. It's over. God's wrath is coming because of what's about to happen. So the city and the temple are destroyed because of abominations. The kingdom is stripped from those people and given to another. And what happens? The message by Jews goes out to the world. Again, for how long? I just put question mark, question mark, question mark. This is a timeline you're looking at right here in words, but a timeline. For how long? I don't know. We'll wait and see. It's getting exciting. It certainly is getting exciting. And then the harvest comes. Then the time to bring forth our fruit. Or, same thing, or the wedding feast comes. And it's time to attend and make sure that you are dressed right. Whichever way you want to put it. That's what Yeshua tells us about our day, about where we are. That's the information he gives. All the rest of this about destruction in Jerusalem, and this is all from a historical perspective, what has already occurred, verbatim to what Yeshua said, to that generation. Okay, so let's look at one more just for a pattern. Again, same pattern, but now having an idea about this pattern, let's look at another set of what we call end time verses. Go to any preacher, teacher out there. Let's say these are end time verses about the second coming of Messiah, and there's a point when it is. But you need the measuring tool, the plumb line, the ruler that we just established the outline. And again, up on top, temple, Jerusalem, destruction. Then the nations hear the word, the Gentiles. Then the end, the wedding feast, the coming of the Lord, all the rest of it, however you want to say it. Let's look at Luke chapter 21. And now this is a parallel version to Matthew chapter 24. I didn't want to get into Matthew chapter 24 for tonight. We'll maybe pick that up next week. But if you can understand Luke 21 with the tools that we just learned, understanding Matthew 24 is going to be a piece of cake. But you need this historical understanding that the events Yeshua is talking about, though they are prophecy to him and to those he's speaking to you and I, 2,000 years later, they are history. Here's Luke chapter 21 and verse 5. And as some were speaking about the set apart place, the temple, that it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he, meaning Yeshua, said, these that you see, the temple, the days are coming in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. So guys, what temple are they talking about? The one in Jerusalem at the time that they are standing there. They're not talking about some other thing to come. They're talking about that temple. And what does Yeshua say about that temple? Not one stone will be left here upon another. These that you see, the days are coming which not one stone shall, and of course that's 70 AD, shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they asked him, saying, Teacher, but when shall this be? Now this is real important. We understand what the question is. When shall what be? When shall the destruction of the temple occur? Not one stone left upon another. And what is the sign when this is about to take place? What's about to take place? The destruction of the temple, 70 AD. So the questions that they're asking are directly related to the conversation they just had about the temple, to which Yeshua just said, not one stone upon another. And again, we get to Matthew 23 and 24, and we put this all together. You're going to see this is connected to Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Your house is going to be left to you desolate, which you'll see a little bit of that here as well. So let's see, where are we? Verse 8. And he said, see that you are not led astray, for many shall come in my name, many false messiahs. Now we think of this as him saying, before I come, there's going to be lots of false messiahs and people are going to be watching him. And that may very well be true. And there have been lots and lots and lots of false messiahs. But he's talking about the people of Israel. He's talking about their generation. Be careful. There was, and in their generation, multiple people said they were Messiah. Multiple people got an army together and started fighting each other, started fighting between zealots, started fighting between sects, people against people, culture against culture, nation against nation. They started fighting against the Romans, and the Romans fought them back. This was going on in their day. This was stuff that was happening to them at that moment, and everybody that came and said that they're Messiah and they're gonna do what the Jewish concept of Messiah was. We're gonna kick out the Romans. We're gonna kick out all the unbelievers. We're gonna set up the temple. We're gonna cleanse everything. That was commonplace in their day, before Yeshua came and after Yeshua ascended. So he's telling those people, the disciples, the apostles, those people that would believe, many people are going to come in my name saying, I am, and the time is near. Then do not go after them. But when you hear of fightings and unrest, where? In Jerusalem. When you hear the different Pharisaic groups and sects are going at each other, when you hear there's 5 groups of zealots and they're all fighting each other, when you hear, which is exactly the situation of the destruction of the temple, they were fighting each other first. In fact, one of the reasons they starve is they burn out each other's food supplies before the Romans even get there. They were at each other's necks. This is what was going on. Here is Yeshua's description of what will go on in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas before the destruction of the temple. When you hear of fightings and unrests, do not be alarmed, for these have to take place first, but the end is not immediately. And this went on for like the last 40, 50 years before Jerusalem actually was destroyed. He said to them, nation shall rise against nation. Rome has a civil war. Plus the zealots are fighting the Romans. Groups of people are fighting the Romans. The Romans are fighting them. Skirmishes all the time. And kingdom against kingdom. Plus Rome is fighting all the other peoples all around them as well, trying to keep the Roman peace in the land that they own. Verse 11. And there shall be great earthquakes in various places. And that happened all over the place. Jerusalem is a tectonic disaster. There's earthquakes all the time there. And scarcities of food and deadly disease. These are all verifiable historical things that went on in Jerusalem leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. All of these things historically, and actually, and I'm going to throw just a little tidbit out there because eventually we'll get there. He's talking about the 4 horsemen. He's talking about the 4 colored horsemen of Revelation. These are the things that will occur that will bring us to the day of the Lord, the destruction of the temple. It says, and there shall be horrors and great signs from heaven. And there were. I mean, you can go to Josephus and all the other things, the comet and all this stuff happened. But before all, here's I put it in red so you guys can see it. But before all this happens, they shall lay their hands on you. He's talking about the disciples, the apostles. He's telling them what's going to come after the crucifixion and resurrection. They shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the congregation. Again, that's a terrible it's lacking. It's not just congregations. I get why they translate it that way. It's a little bit more generic, but he's talking about synagogues. He's talking to them of that generation, saying this is what people in the synagogues are going to do to you. Read the book of Acts. Did they do all of that? Yes. And not just the book of Acts. This was going on in all the synagogues, including, we call them churches, but we have the mindset of something very different. We were looking at today as church, not as church was then. Every one of the churches of that day were synagogues. And the same persecutions that were going on in the synagogues of Jerusalem and Judea and the outer areas was also going on in the synagogues in Thessalonica. And so people are going through the stuff that Matthew says would happen. And if they don't know where the differentiation is between coming to the destruction of Jerusalem and that there might be a gap after that before Messiah comes, I think they're looking at it, and I understand why, they're looking at as the destruction of Jerusalem and Messiah coming right after it. Like there's no gap. That's it. He's coming right then and there. And that's what they were expecting in Thessalonica. And when we get there, we'll talk more about that. So here it is. Synagogues, verse 13, and it shall turn out to you for a witness. Therefore, resolve in your hearts not to premeditate on what to answer. He's telling them when you get taken before these leaders, for I shall give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries shall not be able to refute or resist. And just think about Saul and Peter, the stories that we do have. Exactly, this happened to them. Exactly, they were brought before kings and rulers and Caesar. And they gave testimony. Exactly what this says is exactly what happened. And you shall also, he's talking about the disciples, shall be betrayed by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. And some of you shall be put to death, and you shall be hated by all, by both Jew and Gentile. So not only are they going to persecute you in the synagogues, you're going to have Rome after you as well. Nobody's going to like the Netzarim. The Jews aren't going to like it, the priests, the Pharisees, and that's the conflict that we see going on in the book of Acts and beyond, with what we call the Judaizers. This is the conflict that is going on. And who's doing this? The people in the synagogues that they belong to, their own cousins, their own moms, their own dads, who want the way of the Pharisees or think that and don't want to hear this Yeshua stuff and my son, he's dead to me now. That kind of stuff. And that's exactly what Yeshua said was coming. And you shall be hated by all, both Jew and Gentile. Same thing was going on in Thessalonica, because of my name. But not a hair of your head shall be lost at all. Possess your lives with your endurance. So he said you're going to die. But what he's saying is that's not the end, and you don't lose even if you die. Let's go on reading. Verse 20. This is the next verse. So what was what was the whole story about? What's going to be the sign when we know Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, when the temple's going to be destroyed? First, before any of that, you're going to get kicked out and all the rest of this. Then there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and nation against, all of that going on all around us. Verse 20. And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that it's laying waste, its desolation is near. So what's the sign? I mean, guys, all right. Wars, rumors of wars, all that stuff, I'm sure is going on all the time in Jerusalem. But when you see the Roman army start to march, when you hear, because it wasn't just Jerusalem, they wiped out 44 cities, hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people outside of Jerusalem before they ever got to Jerusalem. Everybody heard the horror stories of what was going on with all the cities around them. So when you see Jerusalem surrounded by its armies, then know that its time of laying waste is near. That's the sign, guys. That's the sign. That's the answer to their question. What's the sign that I know Jerusalem and the temple is going to be destroyed? Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of her go out, and let not those who are in the fields enter her. He's talking about the Netzarim. He's talking about people that love him, that know him. When you see this, get out. Go out to the mountains. Go to the wilderness. Go to the area of, I forgot what the name of it is, Jordan today. Go out there. Guys, people take this and they apply it to some time off in the future. Guys, with all the technology and everything that we get, do you really think people could run out of Jerusalem and go to Jordan and be safe? No, not with GPS and smart missiles and bombs and satellites. You can't go anywhere. You're not going to escape anything. This is talking about what did happen. And we know historically, this is what they did. They left, they went out. So he's talking about, and this is going to connect with Matthew 24. These are the same words he's talking about. When you see this, do this. Same words he's saying. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the midst of her go out, and let not those who are in the field enter her, because these are the days of vengeance, wrath. The king was wroth with them because they refused it, killed their prophets, killed the son, according to the parable of the vineyard, killed the son. So the king is wroth. What is the king going to do? He's going to destroy those evil ones. He's going to destroy those people and burn down their city and temple. Hopefully it all comes full circle now. Because these are the days of vengeance, to fill all that has been written. All of this was written about in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Even all the writings of the first destruction of the temple are a prophecy, a testimony, if you would, so we can understand what was going on in the heart of God as the second temple is going to be destroyed. And woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing children in those days. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't even imagine the horror of what a young mother would be going through, knowing Rome is hearing all the things that are going on, knowing what the possibility is. And here's the crazy thing. The people in Jerusalem were crying peace and safety. We have the temple. We bind together. God's behind us. We've got the temple. We're going to defeat Rome. And people stayed in Jerusalem because it was during the time of Passover. They stayed in Jerusalem. They listened to these scorpions give them venom, and they believed it. And for the next 5 months, they wished they were dead as they see all that's going on around them with Rome coming at them. But we'll get into Revelation and more of the history of that. But I mean, I just can't imagine what must have been on their minds. It says, for there shall be great distress in the earth and wrath upon this people. Judah, Israel, the temple, all of them. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. The destruction of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem shall be trampled underfoot by the nations until the time of the nations are filled. Well, yeah, Jerusalem today is still trampled by the Gentiles, but is the time of the nations filled? Is it over? And this is kind of a really important point that kind of puts it out of sync with what most end time concepts are. This says that when Jerusalem falls, they're to be put by the edge of the sword and led away captive into all nations. Well, if it's a future event, then that's going to happen all over again? No, absolutely not. It has already happened. They've already been scattered. The diaspora has already occurred, and the time of the Gentiles is still going on. Because when the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, then all Israel shall be saved. So we are in the times of the Gentiles. This is, I believe, what he's speaking about here by saying the times of the Gentiles to be filled. I think that's the gap. So he just finished telling us about the fall of Jerusalem. What happens after that? The nations come in. The gospel goes to the nations. The nations trample Jerusalem. Verse 25, there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth anxiety of nations, and bewilderment at the roaring of the sea and the agitation, men fainting from fear and expectation of what is coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now, I admittedly, I don't know if that is part of the destruction of Jerusalem. I don't think so. I think that's the gap. I think when he says, and the times of the Gentiles will be fulfilled, that verse 25 is a description of what to us has been the last 2,000 years. What has gone on in all the world, signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, anxiety of nations, bewildered. Guys, look at the last 2,000 years of history. It's horrible. It's nothing but death and disease and pestilence and murder and war and rape. That's the whole of human history. All that he's talking about here, the times of the Gentiles. And if that's true, if we're putting in this, if we're using that same measuring line, this is the gap in between the fall of the city and the giving of fruit, or the fall of the vineyard and the giving of fruit, the fall of the city and the wedding feast. Then verse 27, which is why I think this one line, verse 27, is the only line here that is about the second coming of the master. So if the nations trampling is the gospel going out to the nations, to the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, and all the sun, the moon, the stars, all of these things are going to go on for 2,000 years, this horror and stuff that's going to go on, what happens at the end of it? It's time to give fruit. It's time to go to the wedding feast. And then, verse 27, remember, we will go all the way back to the original example. That word then in between the first souffle and the second souffle. How long is it? We don't know. Could be a long time. And then another indeterminate amount of time. And then, for us, 2,000 years that have gone by, they shall see the Son of Adam coming in a cloud with power and much glory, for the fruit harvest, for the wedding feast. See, now if you read that without knowing that in the parable of the vineyard, there's a pattern, and in the parable of the wedding feast, there's a pattern, and you don't attach that pattern to this reading, it's easy to read this and say, oh, all this stuff's going to happen. Jerusalem's going to fall. The temple's going to fall. The rest of that. And then we're going to see the Son of Man in his glory the next day, or that week, or within that 7-year period, or within that 3.5-year period. We're going to see him up there. I get why we could read it that way if we disregard 70 AD. If we disregard that as the fulfillment of all of these prophecies. But if we do understand what it is, I'm telling you, the whole book changes. The whole concept absolutely changes here. And let's just end with this. I'm already a minute over. Let's just end with this. These are the three graphs, if you would, charts that, again, I want you to see there's the same pattern. There's the wedding. There's the rejection of the servants. Parable of the vineyard. There's the temple, Jerusalem, the vineyard. There's the killing of the prophets. Then there's the killing of the son, just like there's the killing of the other servants. Then the temple is destroyed, and then Jerusalem is destroyed. Then another people are given the kingdom, or others are invited. And we have no idea of the time frame in between that. But it teaches us there is a time frame. Then the wedding of the wedding garments, the wedding and the garments, then the fruit. And that's exactly the pattern we just read in Luke 21, except Luke 21 starts off with the killing of the servants. They're going to do this to you, but first they're going to do this to you. Then wars and rumors of wars, etc., etc., etc. And then it ends with the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, the temple being laid desolate. Then what happens? Then the times of the Gentiles occurs. And how long has that been going on? Again, it's the same gap, 2,000 years, give or take. And then what does the last verse say? Then you will see the Son of Man coming on with clouds in glory. And I want you to see that it is the same. If you understand the pattern, it's going to show up everywhere. In Matthew 24, in Luke 19, it's going to show up everywhere. In Thessalonians, it's going to show up in Revelation. Once you have this pattern, everything starts to fall into place. And we'll leave it right there for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed that study. I know it's a little bit intense tonight. And this is just the introduction, guys. This is just the introduction. We haven't even got into Thessalonians yet. but we need to understand this pattern. We'll get maybe a little bit into Matthew 24 next week. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, guys, if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that. And we appreciate all your support, both emotionally, spiritually, financially. Thank you so much for your support. It enables us to do what we do. So thank you for that, guys. Don't forget to join us tomorrow morning for a new morning manna. And of course, this upcoming Shabbat, we will have our hidden manna. And we're going to have an abbreviated message this weekend. We're still going to have a message up there, a little bit of worship service, but it's a big day for us. We've got a membership meeting going on, so it's going to be a little bit abbreviated. So make sure you tune in early if you're going to watch us this weekend. It's just going to be a much shorter message, but still you're going to be encouraged, I hope, and be challenged in Yah. Guys, thank you so very much for watching tonight. Hope you enjoyed that. Listen to it again. If you got questions, make sure you leave them in the comment section. I'll do my best to try to answer them. Go over the notes again. Do it slowly. Try to make this make sense, and we'll see where Yah leads us with that. Guys, God bless, and as always, shalom.